technical difficulties. Speaking of technical difficulties, I can't get my camera to work tonight, so sorry about that. Anyway, having said that, let's get on. What I want to do is I want to go through the two bylaws as not in depth, because they're together, they're about 100 pages, and it's quite technical information. So I'm going to go through sort of a lighter view of them. And in the week that I've had a look at them, I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I'm certainly going to give you my view of what as I see it from today. And you'll see at the bottom, I've put a little note about the zoning bylaw, and all I want to do there is just talk about a little bit about setbacks, because the two building bylaws, I'll be referring to setbacks off and on, so I just thought I'd throw that in at the bottom. If we get to it, fine. So having said that, let's get on to bylaw 710, which is the main bylaw, and the other bylaw we'll get to is an amendment to this bylaw. And so the key piece in 710 that isn't in or it's modified from other bylaws and isn't in a lot of bylaws in BC. It's been adopted all around the province quite a bit. It's called the STEP Code, and what it is a section of the BC Building Code that provides for building buildings a little bit tighter. In other words, not so much air movement, loss of air through leakage, and more insulation values, and taking care, in other words, to make sure that you don't lose heat where some buildings would. So it's where the buildings will all be in the future, but moving forward with this today is a good step. The thing about step 3, which is where this bylaw takes us, is that it uses principally the construction methods of the standard building code, just a little bit more detail in them. So the competence level of the constructors and the availability of materials is pretty much normal for a step 3 building. So that's a big difference in the bylaw 710. One of the main things it does, it reduces the use of greenhouse gases. It lowers the heat demand, in other words, saves money to the homeowner. And you'll find that in that kind of a building, the living space is more comfortable. The air is all well tempered, and there's no or very few cold spots, and it's a lot easier to enjoy your life in a step 3 building. Step 3 is sort of the middle road. Step 1 is the code of the day, and step 5 is a very intricate and detailed step up. So step 3 is sort of doable and a big advantage to the users and to the economy and to the greenhouse gas reduction. The next slide is bylaw 711, which is, as I said, an amendment to 710, which includes a number of things that are related to the conditions in Lytton, fire interface conditions principally. And there's it's quite extensive. There's the main effort is to create buildings that are resistant to the type of fire interface you get between forests and urban settings like the village. And I don't need to expound on that very much. We've all been there, you especially, and I feel sorry for you. But this approach is going to make anything that may happen in the future less, well, it's going to help reduce any problems. It's not a panacea, but it's going to help reduce problems. So let's go on to the first piece is the fire safety. And just a heads up, it applies to all new buildings and all renovations within the boundaries. So while we're all thinking about the area that was destroyed in the fire, this bylaw actually applies to the whole municipality. As a result, and the mobile home remark at the top, the mobile homes are still present in your zoning bylaw, but with this bylaw, they'll never be able to be fire safe enough to meet the standards of this bylaw. On the other hand, modular homes, and if you don't know the difference, mobile homes are made to one standard. Modular homes are made in a factory, but they're made to the building code standards. So 2x6 walls and insulation and all that, the normal things in the building code, as opposed to mobile homes, which are a little different building style. Mobile homes, our modular homes will have to be modified to meet the fire safe building requirements. And that's not a little thing. So anybody that's considering that should have a long, hard talk with their prospective suppliers about the requirements in this bylaw. No log homes will be allowed. Now we get down to fire safety on the outside of the building and the wall systems. Class A fire rated roof is just a roof that's the highest, has the highest level of resistance to flame and fire. The exterior walls, 1 hour rated. That means in this case that there's extra gyp rock on the inside and the outside to prevent heat, radiant heat mostly, from transferring from the outside into the inside of the building. The wall finish on the outside has to be a material that is won't burn, basically. And like stucco and brick are common, like everybody understands that, but there's a myriad of other products on the market that have ratings. What I'm talking about when I say rating is a fire resistance rating. And you would have to find products for the outside of the house that have a fire resistance rating. Similar thing with doors. They have to be non-combustible, your outside doors, and they have to have a 20-minute fire resistance rating. And that's the kind of thing that's marked on the door, and you can see it easily. Windows are the same. They have to have a 20-minute fire resistance rating. They can still be like openable and everything. They just have to have a more complex and more fire resistant assembly that the glass is in, and the glass has to be of a particular, 1 or 2 particular kinds of glass. You wouldn't notice it looking out of the glass. It's not wires or anything like that. Balconies, decks, fences, all have to be non-combustible. That's quite a jump, quite a significant thing to have to work on, because a balcony that's non-combustible is a difficult thing to achieve on a wood frame house. So it's not impossible. It's just one of those things. Lpg tanks, in other words, propane tanks, if that's was your choice of heating fuels, they have a large setback, 33 feet from buildings. So you basically, wherever you're going to put your propane tank, you draw a circle around it that's 10 meters in radius, and you can't have any buildings in that radius. And there's requirements later on that we'll get to about vegetation around the tanks. It has to be cut back and cut up above them as well. So the next slide, I'm trying to look at, okay. The next slide, now this is, the first was about your building, and this is about the zones around your house. And these zones are essentially circles around your house. So zone 1A has to be bare soil covered with non-combustible material. So it could be cement or rocks or any combination of non-combustible things with nothing growing underneath it. And that's 5 feet from your eaves. Just to give you an idea what it means is, you put your back up against the outside of your house and take 3 paces. That's about as far out from the house as this zone goes. So that's where your non-combustible material would go. So that's zone 1A. Zone 1 is sort of the next 25, 30 feet, which goes out to 33 feet from the wall of your house. And that's about vegetation. You got to, it's, I don't know what less fire-prone vegetation is, but it's a description that's common, and we'll be able to figure it out as we go on. So not just the normal forest growth. And all debris and everything around your house in that zone, that 33-foot zone, has to be removed. Just can't have any debris there. Can't store your firewood there if that's your, if you do that. No yard furniture, no trailers, no storage sheds, except that accessory buildings can be built in that area, provided they're built the same way as your house. So all non-combustible materials, fire-resistant roofing, and the same space around it with no vegetation and all those other criteria. So you can build a little shed in the yard, in other words. But you can't just buy a tin garden shed or something like that. And zone 2 is much further out. And in most of the houses that we're talking about in the town site, 100 feet is obviously, it's going to be in the neighbor's yard and then some. So, but some people would have a situation where this could affect them in other parts of the town. So it just talks about reduced fire loads, and now and pruning up. Now you're starting to get into the kind of activity that you see in forest fire management issues. And zone 3 is even more like that. It's more like a forest that's been pruned and looked after. The other thing that I didn't get into the details of is when this is basically for relatively flat ground. Sloping ground adds another whole dimension to it that we can get into in detail, but not in this slide bank. So the next slide. So now this talks about generally like planning your landscaping, apart from any of the bush and things that may be around your house. You need to make sure that whatever vegetation you decide to put in for decorative purposes or whatever is fire safe, is, well, not safe, but the fire risk from it is limited. And when you're building your home, you would have to present a plan during the building approval process that shows that you've thought about that and what you're going to do in your plan. And somebody like me who has no green thumbs would have to figure it out because I don't really, I'm not too clear on all that, but we'll all learn as we go, I'm sure. Then the maintenance. So you can't just do all these things and leave them. There's a maintenance requirement in the bylaw that goes along in perpetuity in relation to your property. So there could be issues later where somebody from the village may come by and say, you're not looking after this or that, or you shouldn't have planted something, or various things contrary to the bylaw. And the fourth thing in here that is less related to fire issues is it's called Safer Homes Standard. And I printed it out. There's 3 slides. We'll just go through them quickly. We talked, the first one is about exterior thresholds at the door. So that's that little plate that you step over when you go into a house. And in this standard, you wouldn't have that little plate. You just have a flat surface from the exterior to the interior. So that's another little complexity that you'd have to make sure when you're buying things like doors. Now you've got to have a non-combustible door. You've got to have it fire rated to 20 minutes, and you've got to have it without thresholds. The interior thresholds are pretty commonly not there, so this isn't a big deal. There's some hallway widths that are a little bit wider than some homes may have normally. And then the next few things are sort of pre-planning for railings and grab bars and things. So you have to put some backing in for them in case at some time in the future you might need them. And the last thing I want to talk about in this slide is sink cabinets. And I haven't quite visualized what this is about, but cabinets underneath each sink are easily removed. So let's work on that one a little later. I don't know. I can't describe that to you, sorry. The next piece is, so that was the sort of the building components. The next piece is the electrical. There's placing of light switches a little bit lower than normal, more outlet boxes. There's a few things here, you can read through them. They're fairly self-explanatory. And they're, I'll just leave it at that. And then the plumbing, it's not really too much of a deal. They want the shut-off valve in a shower and tub set up to be closer to where you stand on the floor. They want all the plumbing pipes roughed in lower than normal, which is interesting. It has absolutely no effect on how the plumbing system will work. So it's just a requirement to have them lower. And then this pressure temperature control valves, that's pretty much a standard everywhere anyway. That just means that when you when you set the temperature in your shower and somebody uses cold or hot water in the house somewhere else, the valve adjusts the temperature to stop it from changing from what you've set it at. It's a mechanical device that slips back and forth inside the tap. So, and as I say, that's pretty common assembly in most homes these days. Now, we're going to have a couple of slides, and I'm not sure where they've gone. Do you know, Jasmine, where they are, or?
Which ones are you looking for? The structure ignition zones?
Yeah, I was thinking that we had nested that into this program or this presentation somewhere. Okay.
There you go.
So sorry about that. I thought it would come up sooner and it didn't. But earlier on, we were talking about the zones around your house, and this is just a more dramatic plan of what they look like. The plan on the left side of the screen is to scale. So it shows you a building site on Fraser Street by 6th, I guess. And that's just for an example. And that's how those zones would work around a house. So you can see how they just cross over everybody's property line. So by the time you go through with it, everybody would be in pretty much in the zone 1. Maybe a little bit of some yards might be in zone 2. And this vision, or the piece on the right, is not the scale. It's just to give you some visual sense of what the wording of that section meant. Now, if you can pop up the next one, I think this is going to be a surprise for me. So pop up. Oh, sorry, the next attachment. Okay. All right. I wasn't okay. That's fine. Remember earlier I mentioned about when we're talking about the way the land would be cared for as far as vegetation and everything, and how it was all those requirements were pretty much for flat land. So you can see your town site there. The dark red line is approximately where the ridge is, where after the slope comes up from the rail grade. And so, as we all know, that's where the fire came up and over the ridge and moved into the community. And so the standards that we're talking about for fire prevention on buildings would apply throughout that zone. And it's intended to help resist fire in that kind of a circumstance that you went through. And the fire modeling that evolved this drawing was built, came to the conclusion, the understanding that from the dark red line to the dotted or broken thin red line, a little bit closer to the bottom of the page, that is the distance that you'd have to be from that ridge with that steep slope to be considered to be out of a danger zone for the fire. So it's pretty obvious, based on the science and based on what happened to you guys, that there's a real understanding that we need to do something to address that. So that's what the fire safety part of the bylaw 711 is all about. And the last slide yeah, there we go. And this is, as you can see, Fraser in Maine. So there's house facing Maine and house facing Fraser on each side of Fraser. Those dotted boxes are the area that you can build in according to the zoning bylaw. And the little dot is to represent a propane tank. So that's what you can see the 33 feet around the propane tank does to your building area. And that's just for example. And I mean, so I have almost come to the conclusion that having propane tanks in that area is not going to be a viable option, just based on this. If you take that picture and multiply it by every lot, you can see how you'd have to have the buildings would be, the location of the buildings would be very limited. It would limit your zoning requirement by at least a third. So that is a quick look at the new bylaw 710 and 711, and with some of the implications of it, just a general overview of it. And as I said, it's 100 pages and it refers to another standard that's another 100 pages. So even with the best of your questions, we're probably not going to uncover every little thing tonight, but there's lots of time to get at that. So I'm open for questions and discussions and anything. So Yasmin, I'll just let you set people up to have a talk.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So I know there's been a few questions so far in the chat. Thanks for those. I've noted those. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to speak out loud. So just do that by clicking reactions at the bottom and then raise hand. The first question that I saw here is, could a copy of the PowerPoint be available on the website? And yes, absolutely. Right after this meeting, we can upload that to the website. The second question that came in is there any choice about safer homes requirements, or are they just added as part of the bylaw forever?
Well, everything is about choice tonight. Council have given this bylaw one reading, and this is an opportunity for you all to become informed about what that bylaw looks like. And that ability to become informed will go on for a few days too. So you don't, if you feel like you want to lay down and think this over, that's fine too. But the idea is that once you're informed, you may have comments that you want to get back to council about the bylaw, and that's why there's a first reading. That's why there's a public meeting. So we're right in the middle of getting input from everyone. So and changes can be made. The bylaw isn't etched in stone. The changes will be considered by council if there are any, and those changes will be made by council before the bylaw is finally adopted.
Great, thanks, Ron. I just see Denise O'Connor has her hand up. Denise, I'm going to ask you to unmute now so you can ask your question out loud.
Hi, yes. What have you heard from the insurance companies? Because we know that IBC won't cover bylaws. They said they won't cover bylaws that come into effect after the fire. So if that's the case, would the village consider grandfathering in those of us who want to build replacement under our policies to bylaw 693?
Well, that is a question that I can't answer. That would be a question that we can just forward to Mayor and Council for their consideration. I don't have
Yes,
any
thank you.
power to answer that. So thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Great, we can note that one and we will get back to you. The next question in the chat here is, I believe you said no tin sheds. And there's just a note that that was actually the only structure remaining in this individual's yard. Everything else burnt around it. So I'm just wondering if you can expand on why no tin sheds.
Well, that may have been the case. And I've been to more than one place where there's been fires go through developed urban settings. There are anomalies for sure, but I would guess there was other tin sheds that didn't survive. So the point is really, in general, what we want is buildings that have that resistance to the fire built into them, and not something that wouldn't be able to resist the fire. In this case, I would hazard a guess that the flames just didn't get to that tin shed, but I don't know any of the circumstances. But the reality is, most tin sheds wouldn't have survived the fire that happened in Lytton.
Great, thanks, Ron. And I see Ron Matuzzi has his hand up. Ron, do you want to comment also?
Yeah, thanks. It's actually quite timely. We just received a draft report today from BC Wildfire on the analysis, and it's not public yet. It's going to be reviewed, but I think, you know, some of the conclusions is as intense some of as these are, you know, no propane tanks near houses. That review will show that, in fact, a lot of the fire spread because of sheds and fences and propane tanks as it moved through. And so the wildfire recommendations that came forward from ICLR, anyways, that they had sort of worked on to the Canadian standard, are pretty much in line with the recommendations in the draft report that I just saw today. In fact, they almost parallel. It's kind of scary because there were two different groups coming forward. I mean, the reality is the nature of the fire that went through Lytton could happen again. It wasn't a forest fire; it was a grass fire, and so I think that you know, the recommendations are that the community is going to have to take extraordinary steps to try to be fire resilient in the future, because there is a possibility that, you know, a fire can happen. Now the question is, what does it do, and if we can take those steps. So you know, again, I'm not an expert in the field, but I was just struck today by the similarity between the recommendations and, in fact, what is being proposed by this bylaw.
Great, thank you so much for that.
And from my experience, to Ron's point, yeah, I've walked through fire zones, and it's quite amazing what will sometimes remain standing. I saw one home that everything for blocks around was devastated, and one home that was absolutely intact, and the rose bushes weren't even painted on the front lawn. So, you know, fire is wind driven, and it'll do very strange things. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Jesua, I see your hand up. Jesua Lightfoot, I'll ask you to unmute now.
Okay, thank you. I actually have several questions, but I'll try to list them in order of importance. I haven't read the bylaw well, and it does refer to the BC code, so it is quite a complicated document. So I just want to pick Mr. Dickinson's mind. And what is your opinion of solar panels? Would that be allowed on a roof, given that we're trying to minimize fire risk?
Well, there's a big if attached to my answer, because they would have to be fire rated. And the if is, I don't know if they make fire rated solar panels. So there's your answer. I don't know. But it's an interesting question, and you know, it's way we should be going in the future. So if they do make them, as long as they met the same standard as the roof material, I don't know. There's implications because there'd be a space between them and the roof that could gather ash and stuff. But anyway, it's worth looking into, and I don't have an answer tonight.
Well, thank you, because it has seemed sort of muddied around that. I'm not sure. My second question was in 750, I saw that a sprinkler system was required in residential homes. So I'm wondering, is that a BC building code that is part of this, or has that been dropped?
Boy, that's amongst a lot of building code people, that's a loaded question. But no, there's no requirement in the building code to put sprinklers in residential houses. I think what you're referring to in the 750 was there was a requirement in there for some houses to have some boilers assemblies sort of built onto the side of the house. And that area was going to be sprinkled because of its difference from a normal house. But that's just what I think may have been the case. But I don't think there was a requirement, a broad requirement for sprinklers.
Right, I might not have understood it correctly either. So one of the building people we had present to us talked about an energy assessment, and I think it was in 750. I guess it's a professional that comes and does an assessment of your home. Is that a BC requirement? Is it in this building bylaw?
Okay, so if you go back, this is related, more than likely what you're asking about is related to the step code, the step 3, and Bylaw 750 had step 5. There's two ways to determine whether a building has met the step. So let's talk about this building bylaw right now. 710 is about step 3. And there's a complex set of calculations and determinations that any person can use to establish that their building is designed to step 3. Or there's what's referred to as, in the vernacular, as an energy advisor. It's a person who has some expertise in this area that also has a computer program, feeds a lot of the information about your building into the computer program, and that program will then tell the builder or the designer what step that building should expect to get to. So, and that's the most common approach, simply because the mathematical side of it and everything is time consuming. The computer's quicker, and most builders that are building homes today are using the energy advisor, and it's called the HOT 2000 computer assessment program.
And that's a requirement or no?
Well, yes, there's a requirement to establish that the house meets step 3.
Okay.
And that this is the easiest way to get there.
And just what I'm just going to move to the next question, but I will come back to you right after.
Okay.
So the next question I have on the list here is understanding the implications you have just outlined. Is there going to be any flexibility to adapt the rules?
This is the opportunity to make changes. There isn't. I'm not sure if there's a statement in. I think there may be one statement in that bylaw that allows for some inputs that would provide possibly for a alternative solution to some of the aspects of it, but it would be very limited. So really, the time to make changes is the present time. Bring your thoughts to council, and council can decide whether or not they'd be appropriate.
Great, thanks, Ron. The next question here might be for Leslie.
Jasmine,
yeah.
I just want to throw back to that. Put a little star by that question, because I want to read through the bylaw a little bit more, and I'll answer it. I'll tell everybody if there's any modification opportunities.
Great, that sounds good. I'm going to note that one. Perfect. The next question here is, Given that there is an election at the end of the year and a new council may be sworn in, is it possible for them to rescind this bylaw? Is there any binding legislation with the various stakeholders holding us to this bylaw after the new election?
So when a new council is sworn in, they have the ability to amend, rescind, do whatever they would like, as long as it follows legal legislative requirements.
Great, thanks, Leslie.
I mean, I would caution if people are in the middle already of building, that might create some issues, but.
Okay. Perfect. I see Judith Urquhart, you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute now so you can ask your question out loud.
I think I'm unmuted.
You are, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'll just ask one question. It's about the zone 1 combustible debris that you were talking about. And there's no indication of where I can park a vehicle of my regular car that I'm driving. Can I drive it and park it by the house? And if anyone has uninsured vehicles, i.e. they're done with them, but they still park them in their yard, is this going to be noted as something that has to be taken? That's my question.
The vehicle you drive, definitely not. That's just a normal function of living in today's world. So the bylaw specifically mentions trailers and RVs. So it doesn't specifically mention vehicles, unlicensed vehicles, for instance. And so I'm it sounds like it doesn't mention it at this point, but maybe another little star, Jasmine, and I'll dig a little deeper into that to give you an answer, Judith.
Perfect.
I could answer that if you like.
Oh, okay.
So generally speaking, unlicensed vehicles either come under a transportation road bylaw, or they'll come under a good neighbor bylaw, or some communities call a good neighbor bylaw an unsightly premises bylaw.
Perfect. Thanks, Leslie. Ron, the next question for you is, are there modular homes available that meet Bylaw 711 fire safe specifications?
I would say off the top of my head, no. But that doesn't mean that it's not doable. In that the modular homes are built relatively the same as a building in the building code. So the changes could be made to them is what I'm getting at. Whether or not you could get the manufacturer to do that, or whether you would have to do it yourself after you bought the home. But there's a lot of things. All the windows have to be 20-minute rated. All the doors have to be non-combustible and 20-minute rated. The siding has to have a rating. The roof has to have a rating. The walls have to have a rating. So there's a lot of additional work that would be required for a modular home to meet the 711 standards. So it would be possibly impractical, but it would be worth investigating with a modular home manufacturer, is if they started out trying to meet that standard on a line, they might be able to do it. I don't know enough about their manufacturing processes.
Thanks, Ron. The next question here, there was another question about the election, which we answered. And then the follow-up is funding for the rebuild contingent on this bylaw passing?
I don't have the answer. Madam CAO, do you have an answer?
I'm not understanding the question.
So funding that we have allotted through the village, is that contingent on this bylaw passing?
No. Are you, if you're talking about the grant from the municipal affairs, no, it's not.
Okay, great. And whoever typed this question out, if you have a follow-up or clarification, please type it in the chat and I can ask that question again. I see Megan Fandrich's hand up. Let me ask you to unmute here, Megan.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. I have 3 questions. The first is actually one I think Judith also just asked to the chat, but it's for Appendix N for the structure ignition zones. In your presentation, Ron, it said that it's for new and existing buildings, but in the appendix itself, I can't find any reference that it is for existing buildings. So in other words, those of us who are still here on the edges of Lytton. So I just was wondering for clarification on that.
Okay, it would apply if there was renovations or changes related to a building permit for sure. But I thought there was a maintenance standard that would apply in an ongoing basis. So I think I'm gonna pass on a firm answer on that and get back to you. I can see myself flipping 2 or 3 times through the bylaw to get to that answer. So we don't
okay, in a way that leads to my second question though, because having a home here that was built in the late 40s, when I read the building bylaw, it says that if I'm to do any renovations, that any part of the house that's affected, I believe will have to then meet step 3 building code, which I have read that it's really difficult to kind of retrofit older buildings to higher levels in the step. So the building bylaw is really unclear about what exactly that implies. Maybe that's intentional, but if I was to, let's say, put a deck out my backyard, does that mean then I'll have to cut down all the trees within 33 feet of my house, as well as redo the insulation in my entire house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
No, given the sort of extreme example you presented, no. But if you're going to put a deck out the backside of your house, for instance, that would have to be a non-combustible deck. And any attachments that went with it to the house would have to meet the fire resistance standards. And unless the renovation was significant, you wouldn't have to redo your whole house. And the reason I'm not giving you a definitive answer is because if you had come in to me and applied for a building permit when this bylaw was in place, the first thing I would do is come out to your house and look and give you my opinion about how far along we have to go on the changes to the new bylaw, because renovations are a tough choice, and they're always weighed out by costs and difficulty to achieve and what are the benefits, and really, how does a homeowner feel? Like it's a real broad range of inputs to make those kind of choices.
Right, I guess, yeah, that is kind of into my question. And then my third question and final one is about, I was originally going to ask about, in the building bylaw, it says that accessory buildings, which are exempt, I guess, from the bylaw, accessory buildings of 10 square meters or less, yeah, the bylaw doesn't apply to them. And I was going to ask about that because the TNRD standard is 20 square meters, as well as bylaw 693 for the village, our former building bylaw, was also 20 square meters, which I know they had upped from the previous bylaw. So in 2018, they upped that accessory building maximum, I guess, maximum exemption from 10 square meters to 20 square meters. So I was planning to ask about why that is now going back to 10 square meters instead of 20. But then I also saw that basically any accessory building that's within the, I think the 33 feet of the house, even though you don't need to have a building permit for it, it still needs to meet this Appendix M, all of the fire safety standards, which makes, therefore, I think an accessory building, I don't know, a lot more difficult, or really why go through the process? I don't know. I don't see how, if you don't get a building permit, and you don't need a building permit for it, but it still needs to have all of these other qualifications. Where is the enforcement coming in on that? Where's the guidance? Yeah, it's not a very clear question, but it's because I'm not very clear.
Okay, well, let me
about how that works.
let me just take a shot at some of it then. The 10 and 20 square meter thing, the reason 10 is the most common number because 10 is the number that the building code uses. So if a building is under 10 square meters, the building code doesn't apply to it. And most municipalities just tag on with that because it's a prescribed and well-established, scientifically determined size that isn't considered to be obtrusive or dangerous. And so that's why 10. Why did it go to 20? I don't know. There's no law against going to 20. There's nothing to prevent it, but 10 is the established norm. And so that's probably why this bylaw came in at 10.
Okay.
And as far as where does the authority come in if you build a 9.9 square meter or square foot building? Where does that? Yeah, you would slip under the code, but then the Schedule M applies to it, and the requirement would be that you had to meet the requirements in Schedule M, Appendix M, I mean.
Right, but then in that case, it wouldn't be the building inspector enforcing that. So then does it fall onto a bylaw officer or something?
Yeah, who in generally speaking is the same person. So
Okay.
I don't, obviously the staffing in is absent at the moment for a whole bunch of reasons, but I don't know what the future job descriptions will look like, but yes, it would be somebody, a staff person with the village, yes.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Megan, for your questions. If you have any others,
thank
I'll
you.
circle back to you, okay? So next, I'm gonna come back to Jessica to ask the remaining questions. There you go. Can you unmute now?
Thank you. So under bylaw 711, you talked about vegetation maintenance. Do we have
Yes.
any jurisdiction over the rail lines? Is there any way we can make them comply?
Probably not, because they're regulated by federal regulations, and that precludes a municipality or even a province from making regulations on them. So no, I think the only approach we have is a good neighbor approach and see if we can, I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but maybe they'll let us do something. They probably don't want to do it themselves, but anyway, no, we don't have any power.
Okay, other than to lobby, I guess. So you talked about minimal risk for some plantings. So, I mean, most of our citizens love their planters and gardens and whatever, but given that area that has to be clear from the house, is it going to be acceptable to have planters and flower boxes, suggesting that they're of minimal risk?
Well, after you get past the 5 feet past your eave, so 3 paces from your house, you could put them, but not in that space.
So no
between-
flower boxes, I guess, eh? That's
No.
going to be a tough one. Anyway, and just one final question. I haven't read the bylaw well, so I'm not sure, but from the photo that you showed us, it seems like you have to be 5 feet back from the sidewalk as your setback.
It's
Generally?
more than it's 6 meters
From the sidewalk?
at the front of your property back to your building. Yes.
Why is that? Why wouldn't it be more useful to be building close to the sidewalk? So then you'd have the sidewalk, which is 2.5 feet, 3 feet wide. Then you could have 3 feet of cement in front of your house or 4 feet. So that's totally fire resistant, and it would give more space in the backyard for distance to sheds and such. I don't understand.
Well, That isn't in this bylaw. That is the zoning bylaw. So it's not really a point that we can deal with tonight, but you know,
So that's the zoning bylaw.
right.
And from previous conversations, I believe you said a variance could be asked for. Could be requested.
Under a
Is that-
zoning bylaw, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have for now, but I hope we have another opportunity because I think there's a lot to digest and more questions will come up in the next few days. Thanks for your presentation.
Thanks for your questions. And on that note, if there's any question or feedback or questions or anything past today's date for the open house, please send those over to building@lytton.ca. Building@lytton.ca. We can put that in the chat for you, but please keep sending us your feedback throughout this process. I see Denise's hand is also up. Let me ask you to unmute now.
Hi, now I want to also talk about vegetation maintenance, and Jesua, you asked the question about the railway. That was going to be one of mine. But the other piece is that, and my home was on Fraser Street. And many years ago, we purchased village land that was behind our house and beside our house. But many properties on Fraser Street own village, the part of their yard is actually village laneway. So I'm just wondering, like, is there going to be policy developed or something around how the village looks after vegetation maintenance, you know, whether it's those lanes. I don't know how much of the lane goes down behind the bank toward the railway, but there's probably village property along there, as well as Hobo Hollow, those kinds of places. Thank you.
Okay, I am not well enough informed to answer that question. I don't know if anybody else could help me out with that.
So I took a note, and generally speaking, it would be the responsibility of the Public Works Department or a Parks Department. Of course, the village is quite small, so we would have to look into that. But certainly, it's a very good point, yeah.
Great, thanks. The next question in the chat is, do kit homes come built to fire safe requirements, or can they be retrofitted to meet fire safe as per bylaw 711?
Kit homes. Well, I guess it depends on the kit, but where kit homes would have an even greater problem would be meeting the step code. So there's two issues to consider there. I wouldn't say absolutely no, because most of the fire issues are things that if you bought a kit without the exterior finishes, you could buy the exterior finishes yourself that suited the bylaw 711. But again, the step code thing would be a difficult hurdle. It might cause quite a bit of extra work that the kit wouldn't anticipate you having to do. So if you got the right kit, maybe.
Okay, thanks, Ren. The next question is, are there any Class A approved materials for flat roofs?
Simple answer, yes.
Perfect. So I see, Jesua, I don't know if this is a legacy hand or if you still have your hand up with a new question, but I just asked you to unmute if you do have a new question.
No, I'll take my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks. And Denise, same goes to you. I'm not sure if this is just from before. Yeah, okay. Perfect. Let me go back to the chat here. Are any reasons why sprinkler systems aren't included in the fire safe regulations?
Well, yes, it's a big, long, drawn out answer, but the provincial government sets the building code up as the go-to document to regulate safe and healthy construction. And they have another act, the Community Charter, that says that if a municipality wants to make regulations about things that the building code already makes regulations about, they can't really do that. So the building code does not require single family dwellings to have sprinklers. And through that convoluted set of requirements, the Community Charter and everything, that prohibits the municipality from requiring them. It isn't to say that you can't put them in. Like the building code is a minimum requirement. If you want to build better than minimum, you know, that'd be great. The only thing is, it's like everything else. Once you decide to put the sprinkler system in, you have to put one in that is designed properly. But you could do it. It doesn't prevent people from doing it. It just prevents municipalities from forcing people to do it.
Great. I think you answered the question, but there was an example that was sent through, which is Logan Lake had homes fitted with sprinklers to prevent fire, outdoor roof systems. I think you covered that.
That is different. They had sprinklers on the roofs. Those aren't house sprinkler systems that are inside the house.
Okay, Ron, would you like to speak to the outdoor roof systems for sprinklers?
I don't need to add a thing to what his worship just said.
Okay.
That's true. You can put a sprinkler anywhere you want. It's nothing. The sprinkler systems we're talking about are the ones that are the little heads you see in commercial buildings and that sprinkle water when there's a fire. So.
Great. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, and we don't have any more hands up. So I will, oh, there we go. Please, I see Megan's hand up right now. I'll ask you to unmute, but please continue to send those through the chat or raise your hand as we move forward here.
Hi, thanks. I just pulled up the zoning bylaw and double check something. So I'm just wondering, so for our commercial buildings, there is not actually a setback for the front of the parcel. If we're going by, I thought that maybe the setbacks would change, but if they haven't, so for commercial buildings, they can build right up to the front of the parcel, so right up to the sidewalk. But then if there has to be the 5 feet zone with no vegetation, does that mean then that in our commercial on Main Street, we won't be able to actually have trees? Assuming that we can find trees that are fire rated for our area, etc. I understand that in the residential areas, we could still have trees because they'd be further than 5 feet from the house. But yeah, I'm wondering about on the commercial section.
It's an interesting question. I would say it means, yes, you couldn't have a bunch of planters up against your building, for instance. You would have to have them, as you said, 5 feet away. So yeah, that would be problematic. And you couldn't do it.
And then it would definitely change the feeling of our town. The trees were a really nice addition. But anyway, I think that's all my questions for the night. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. The next question in the chat is irrigation a consideration in general in future fire safe planning? And just a note, the areas where people were watering were much less impacted by fire.
You know, the study that Mr. Matuzzi brought up that's just arrived today, and the one that the National Research Council of Canada is essentially the background for the appendix in Bylaw 711. Neither of those that I've found yet anyway refers to the effect of sprinklers on properties during a wildfire. So I guess there's no, I don't know of any place where that has been scientifically accepted as an inhibitor to the spread of urban wildfires. So that's all I know for now, but I can say that there's nothing in the bylaw today that would address that.
Perfect. The next question is, if modular homes are almost impossible to fit into 711 building code, and likewise kit or prefab homes are very difficult to accommodate, are you saying that all homes have to be custom built using designers and engineers?
No, I'm not saying that. You don't need an engineer to build a single family dwelling unless you're doing something very complicated. The building code tells you how to build a single family dwelling without an engineer. So no. Do you need an architect? No. Do you need a professional building designer? If you build it yourself, no. But if somebody else builds it for you, there is a legislation that the province has under the Homeowner Protection Act that requires warranty on new homes. And if you have a person, if you hire a builder who's not an architect or an engineer, or just he's a builder, he needs to have approval from Homeowner Protection Office for his warranty coverage. So that is the only requirement. And if you're building it yourself, there's provisions that you have to follow, but you don't have to have the warranty coverage. So.
Great, thanks, Ron. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do see Denise's hand up. So I'm going to ask you to unmute Denise.
Yeah, Ron, can you explain what you mean by build it yourself? Because you talked about that at another meeting, that we can't just build it ourselves, right? So can you explain that?
Well, it goes back like 1,000 years in English common law, I think, somewhere back there. A man's home is his castle. There's no legislation that prevents you from building your own home. There's restrictions and requirements, but there's nothing to prevent it. So if you wanted to build your house on your lot in Lytton, that would be quite acceptable, as long as you've followed all the other rules as well as the building code.
Great. Noni, I see your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah, I have a question about all of the complicated, the list of things you can and cannot do, and primarily that you cannot do. So I'm wondering where the village council sits in their, first of all, they make the bylaw and say, okay, here's the rules, and here's the things you need to use to build this home this way. And these are the plans where you must, somehow is it up to the homeowner to now find all that stuff? Like, is the village going to assume any responsibility for helping people to actually access this stuff, like find the building materials or source out this stuff, or the plants that will be okay and the plants that won't be okay? Because it's hugely intimidating for people right now listening to this to think, how the heck am I ever going to find my way through all this and get a home built? So that, my question is there any assistance in the short or long term from the people that are now working with the village to kind of make this information more available to people who are attempting to take on this project?
I'm hesitating because I don't know quite how to put this, but the reality is that when you come in with your, even if it's not your plans, if you walk into the office because you want to build a home, you want to get a building permit. There's a lot of advice that just flows between the person at the counter taking your application and the person proposing to do their home. It won't be long before we have a pretty good idea of where you can buy fire rated roof materials, in Hope or in Kamloops or wherever. Doors and things like that, they're available. It's just, none of this stuff that's in any of these requirements is things that aren't available. And so where are they? You know, probably Lower Mainland and Kelowna, you know, for sure. Are they sitting at the Home Hardware in Boston Bar? No. But they're not unusual products. So I would say it'll be a bit of an experiment for the first few houses with all of us, the building inspector and the homeowners. But we will come up with that information, and it'll become a little bit of a catalog that you can pick through. We always have to be a little careful too to say, well, you should go to this building supplier instead of that one, because we can't do that. But hopefully we'll be able to help you out finding that stuff. Yeah.
Ron, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to follow up?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say that when the recommendations on the fire resistant stuff that came through ICLR, they found all the material that you would need at the Kamloops, in Kamloops. So they sourced it in Kamloops when they did their research, just to make sure they had some sense of whether what they were proposing was readily available, because it's a big question. So everything they found, and Noni, I think on the things like building material, that's the kind of stuff that once we land on what the bylaw actually says and where we are, then I think we could do some research and come up and say, okay, here's the kind of plants you can plant, here's the kind of some of those things, and and have that kind of information available. I think material's a little harder because we never know who's stocking what where at any given time, but if we have some idea where people can find it, we're certainly going to help.
Yeah. Having built my own home, I understand how challenging getting stuff to Lytton can be. It's not an easy project. Thank you.
Thanks, Noni. Dawn, I see you're unmuted there. Do you have a follow-up to include?
Sure. I just wanted to comment on a couple of items here, because I'm looking at it from the perspective of what other communities are doing throughout British Columbia. And I would say first and foremost that pretty well all of the Lower Mainland communities and Greater Victoria communities are at step 3 and have been for some time, and have quite a bit of experience dealing with construction and with applications for step 3. And step 3, from one perspective, isn't going to cost very much more, if at all anything, beyond what you would have under your old building bylaw, as long as you have contractors who have experience. If you have contractors who are experienced with expertise and qualifications, and particularly if they're doing more than one house at a time, you got a thing called economies of scale and experience together, and they can develop a house or several houses that not only meet step 3, but they do it in a way that isn't going to cost any more, as Rob Bernhardt said on January 4th in your public meeting, than if you went under your old existing bylaw and the existing building code as well. That said, for people who are interested in dealing with, the next 60 years from now, the next 120 years from now, a lot of buildings, like this building I'm in right now, is 121 years old. And buildings can be built to last, but they have to be built in an efficient way. So if you're going to be proceeding with buildings that are 60 or 120 years old and are not going to be burned down between now and their life cycle time, then you want to make sure that you're looking after future generations. That the next time there's a fire, you don't want to have to replace the whole village. The First Nation has burned down 3 times since 1900, and it's going to keep happening. So at the end of the day, what does it cost to go to step 3? Nothing more, as long as you have efficient construction, but it will give you what's called net zero ready. So the people who are concerned about the next 60 years and future generations, they can have the advantage of net zero ready homes under step 3. And the difference between that and total net zero is simply having, number one, solar panels, which by the way, are fire rated. And if you have solar panels, even though there's space between the panels and the house, it's okay to have them under the rules that we've been talking about tonight. And they're fire rated. I got a text from the manufacturer setting out what the fire rating is. They don't cause fires. They don't spread fires. They're not a fire issue at all. The problem with Lytton is you have to get solar panels that are resilient to snow load. And that's really the only issue that you have there, because you do sometimes, like in the past year, have fairly heavy snow load issue. In regard to the fire resiliency 711 information, according to urban underwriters and CSA, the extra cost for a high hazard area like Lytton for building all that stuff that is in that entire regime dealing with fire rating is $21,000 in addition to the regular cost of building something. What that gives you is reduced fire insurance premiums and deductibles. But it also means your house is more than likely going to still be around if there's a wildfire, wildland or urban interface fire, or just a grass fire that hits town. So that's really critical as well. So the only couple of other things I'd mention, this is not a legal opinion because it's just me commenting. And if it was a legal opinion, it would be confidential and privileged, and I don't want to waive privilege. But I would say that number one, there's absolutely nothing we can do about the rail lines except enter into a servicing agreement with them, whereby the village or a nonprofit entity in the village would enter into a contract to look after the rail lines in the village and just outside of the village to deal with fire issues, because the rail lines are not very good at doing them themselves, and it's a federal jurisdiction issue. Sprinklers is a very confused issue. I agree with everything that Mr. Dickinson said 100%. I would add that the province brought in a thing called the Building Act in 2015, which made it prohibited for a municipality in BC to have requirements for in-house sprinklering without going through a variance with the province. So in the original draft bylaw that was in there, and just be aware, it's not in the current bylaw, but if people want to have it added back in, we can do that by going and getting a variance and approval by the Attorney General of British Columbia on the recommendation of the Building Safety Standards Branch of BC. And they've got that in place for Maple Ridge, Pitt Meadows, and quite a few municipalities in British Columbia. I think there are 11 that have it right now. It doesn't prevent forest fires or wildfires or interface fires. It just puts out a fire within a minute and 10 seconds so that you don't have suffocation before the fire department arrives. Those are my, one last thing, modular homes that can be done. There are 3 companies in BC that make modular homes that can be designed and assembled and in site so that they satisfy these fire requirements. Thank you.
Great, super helpful. Thank you so much. And maybe while I have you, there is a question from a resident that is asking who wrote the bylaws. Is that okay to say?
Yeah.
It was Don Linstow.
Oh, no, I was just going to, may I answer with this, my hand up?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, the basic bylaw is from the Municipal Insurance Association of British Columbia, MIABC, which is a wholly owned corporation of all the municipalities in British Columbia that are subscribers to the insurance program. And they wanted to come up with a bylaw that would be best practices for villages, cities, and regional districts. And so that's the bylaw. What's been added to it is step 3 as opposed to step 5. Remember I said step 5 is net zero, step 3 is net zero ready. You add solar panels and you've got step 5. And what's also been added is 711. 711 is the stuff that has to be approved by the province, which I think is the most interesting stuff that you've been all asking about tonight.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next question here. So structural ignition zones applies to all existing buildings and new builds according to Bylaw 711. Does this also apply to Ponderosa and Loring Way?
Not not completely. It applies when there's to the buildings individually when there's work done on them at a certain to a certain extent. The best of my knowledge, I've read through that twice to try and decide whether it applied generally throughout, and I think no, it's restricted to issues related to the building activity. So if there was an addition or maybe some significant changes to the outside of the building or whatever, it would apply, but not less.
Great, thank you. This next question, I think Don touched on pretty well, but just in case there's anything to add, do you have any idea how much these improved materials will add to the cost of a more traditional build? And in this case, she was specifically asking about glass.
Well, I can't pick glass out of the whole package that Dawn gave us a number on, but it's definitely in that package. So the package that Dawn came up with, the 22,000 or whatever it was, that would include the windows and all the other added requirements.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is there any way we can have cement planters with low risk plants?
Not the way I look at the bylaw at the moment. No, in the first 5 feet, you can't do that. It's totally non-combustible material, period.
Okay. This question is directed at Dawn, but they're just wondering if you can share the names of the 3 companies that design the modular homes that's approved. Maybe it doesn't have to be today, but if we could get that to residents.
I'll give it to Ms. Gruel, the CAO, and then she can distribute it and maybe put it on the website as well. I don't want to be seen to be an advertiser for any of them, but one of them gave a demonstration for me that they actually put a torch on the outside and the inside of their panels, and they created a burn mark, but they didn't burn.
Great. Awesome. We'll follow up on that afterward then. And then actually, Dawn, while I have you, just clarification, could you repeat the association that informed the bylaw? People just didn't catch it.
Absolutely. It's the Municipal Insurance Association of British Columbia, MIABC, and they have a website. I believe the model bylaws are on their website as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, MIABC. Sophie, I see your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Jasmine. I'm Sophie. I'm part of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, who helped develop the wildfire portion, the wildfire safety portion of the bylaw. And I saw there was a question around costing earlier associated with the added costs of materials. So I just want to mention that our team did a benefit cost analysis when we prepared this bylaw for Lytton. And we used specifically 11 random sample buildings in Lytton to cost what we think it would add in terms of additional costs of construction. And we came up with a range of $2,000 to $5,000 additional cost to comply with the bylaw as it stands. So I just want to mention this. So it is not astronomy. Of course, it's an added cost, but we also estimated that the benefits of avoided future losses and having to rebuild in the future, they go up to the value 10 to 20 times the cost that you would put in at the beginning. So I just wanted to mention this to help answer that question around added cost.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sophie. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I do see Melanie's hand up. So Melanie, I'm going to ask you to unmute here.
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie Ross. I'm with the Green Building Technologies Research Group with SAIT. We have been speaking with a few folks from the municipality in relation to the work that we're doing at Kanekabar, which is directly related to coming up with building solutions that can be fire resistant and can address a lot of the challenges that are being brought up in the conversation tonight, as well as meeting the rigor of the BC STEP code. The challenge that's being issued in the homes that will be built at Kanekabar will actually meet STEP code 5. So we'll have a wonderful resource of materials and solutions to share. And we've already been speaking with the mayor and the CAO about how to do that, how to share that with the community so that we can add to that pool of resources. And so I just wanted to let folks know that kind of work is happening in support of the comments that have been made by others on the call today, that there are solutions out there. The numbers that are being shared in terms of what costs could look like in addition to be able to meet these bylaws are in line with the research that we do as well. So it's a very reasonable assumption, and I would champion what Don was saying about really looking at building things to be long lasting. There are some incredible benefits to having those investing those into those strategies up front, and including some of the other elements of the STEP code, which would include things like energy efficiency and other considerations that will actually continue to lower some of your home costs day to day. That kind of information is available and can be shared as well, so that folks can make some informed decisions about direction that you may want to go in with your own home.
Thank you so much for that information, Melanie. Great. It is 7 o'clock now, which brings us to the end of the session. I saw one other question come in, but it looks like Ron answered it already, so that's perfect. I just want to repeat and say, please sit with this over the next few days. Please send us your feedback. You can send that to building@lytton.ca. Yeah, right there on the screen. And we'll continue to gather that and make sure it's reviewed. So thank you all so much for attending the session today. And thank you to Ron for doing this presentation for us and all of our guests here that spoke and added value. We really, really appreciate all of your questions and feedback. This is exactly why we're doing this, is to hear your concerns and get that in the books and noted. I'm just seeing Noni has a question about a deadline for submissions. Ron, is there a cutoff date for that feedback?
Not a structured cutoff date, but we have some council agenda dates booked going forward for readings of the bylaw, and maybe I'll hand that off to the CAO for an answer.
So if council looks at second reading of the bylaws on February 23rd, you'd need your comments in by Friday noon, this Friday noon. Then it would be second reading next week would be suggested, depending on how many comments come in and how much input is given. And then after that, third reading would could be second, third reading next week, but given how much input is into the bylaw from the public, it could be second reading. And then March the 9th, it would be third reading, which would take us to March 23rd for adoption,
Great,
given
thanks.
council agrees to that.
Awesome. So to get your comments in before second reading, that's this Friday, February 18th, I believe is the date at noon. So you can send those to building@lytton.ca or communication@lytton.ca. I'll make sure those get forwarded over. If you do have any additional questions unrelated to the bylaws, please continue to send those to communication@lytton.ca. You can also call the office at 778-254-5004. And I also just want to note that we do have a community meeting next Thursday, February 24th, that you're all welcome to join to answer any questions unrelated to the bylaw. So this concludes today's meeting. Thank you all so much and have a great night.
Hello, Don?
Hi there.
I had a question here on this bylaw on 9.3.
Jasmine, do you want to have everybody exit?
Of seven,
Yeah,
7:10.
absolutely. Just give me about 3 minutes here, okay?
Yeah.
That's on 7.10, 9.3.
Yeah.
C. You know, you're talking about a registered professional, except for garages, carports, garden structures, foundations, excavation components of a new simple buildings, and addition